Welcome to Hashtag Trending, the weekend edition, and our series, Can Canada Get Its Mojo Back? We've been addressing the challenges that Canada is facing as we move beyond the digital age into a new age of artificial intelligence. Now, if you've been paying attention to the news, you'd know that in the past few weeks, it hasn't been an easy time for Canada. There was the threat of huge tariffs that would have devastated our economy, and a realization that this was a wake-up call. While natural resources have long been the driver of our growth, the reality is that we've become much more of a services economy. At a time when digital forces and artificial intelligence is transforming the world of service economies at a speed that no one would have ever thought possible. So as much as this week's crisis brought this into focus, we're not talking about a short-term problem. And in fact, this interview was recorded before tariffs were imposed and thankfully delayed for a month. But make no mistake, with or without last week's crisis, Canada has a huge challenge. And that's what this series is hoping to explore. In this episode, my guest is Colin Deacon. Colin is a senator in our upper house, but before that, he was a successful entrepreneur and businessman. And now, in the second act of his career, he has joined the political world as a true force, seeing the challenges that Canada is facing and trying to help Canadians do a second transformation of their economy. One of the first transformations? We go back to September 10th, 1939. Canada officially declared war on Germany, a week after Britain and France, and a couple of years before the United States came into the war. At the start, Canada was totally unprepared. We were a backwood, former colony, barely survived the Great Depression. We were broke and totally unprepared for a world war that had just been declared. Our regular army had 4,500 men and 5,100 partly trained reservists. Our Air Force had fewer than 20 modern combat aircraft. Our Navy had 6 destroyers. Now, despite these limitations, Canada mobilized. In December 1939, we sent the first Canadian troops to Britain. We established what was called the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan, where we would train 131,000 airmen by 1945. And Canadian shipyards began building corvettes and minesweepers for the Battle of the Atlantic. By 1945, just 6 years from then, over 1 million Canadians served in the military. The merchant marine fleet grew to 400 merchant ships by the end of the war. In total, Canadian shipyards constructed over 4,000 naval vessels, including 300 anti-submarine warships and 4 tribal-class destroyers. Canada played a crucial role in the Battle of the Atlantic, the D-Day invasion, and the liberation of the Netherlands. The country became a leading industrial power with one of the strongest economies in the world. I was born into that era, in the so-called baby boom that followed, an era of incredible prosperity. Now, despite that, I was born into a very poor family. A single mother raised 6 kids with a grade 6 education. We were the kids that you made jokes about. But still, I could, and I did, get a university degree, a job that vaulted me into the middle class and maybe the upper middle class. I did have to take out a student loan. I had to work for months to pay that off. That's the type of wealth and opportunity that was here for all of us. But make no mistake, Canada lost its way. It has not transformed itself into a truly digital economy, and as the next wave hits us, the new AI economy, we are in a difficult situation. Can we come back? Yes, but only with the courage, determination, and the new ideas for a new world economy that's powered by artificial intelligence and technical innovation. So this series has a Canadian focus, but it looks at how a country can tackle these new challenges that are coming at us in an economy that is nothing like we've ever seen. How do we cope? What do? We are asking advice from a number of leading Canadians. And today, our guest is Senator Colin Deacon. Welcome, Colin.
Really great to see you, Jim. Thanks for inviting me to be back on your podcast.
This is great. The audience loved you. We got requests, can we have more of Colin Deacon? So I had to get back to you.
Well, there's one place in Canada where that's the case. Thank you very much.
But I did want to talk to you, and we've been following each other on LinkedIn and talking about this, and I just want to ask you where the country is right now in your mind. Let's start with that question. Where are we?
You probably saw one of my earlier posts, but I think we're in as precarious a position as we were in 1939. The country was very weak financially, having just survived the Great Depression. We had no military. We're entering into an existential threat globally against democracy, and had to act. And within a year, we went from basically 13 ships in our Navy to, I think there's 13 or 14 corvettes starting to protect the North Atlantic. We can do it. We have done it before. My parents' generation achieved remarkable things in the recovery from the Great Depression. But Canada is in a precarious position right now. Our economy is not keeping up. We know that. We are not keeping up competitively in terms of the industries that we are nurturing and ensuring we succeed globally, not just domestically, but globally. We're not doing what we need to do to create the opportunity, jobs, and prosperity that will grow the pie that we keep handing out slices from. And so we've got to really focus in on the economy. We've got to grow, and we've got to grow at a time when there is an existential threat, clearly, to our sovereignty. I'm quite optimistic in what we can achieve. And I'm actually thinking that we may look back. I heard Jean Charest say this, and I think it was a really useful comment, that we may look back in a decade and say that President Trump may have caused us to finally address issues that we should have been dealing with for more than a decade or two or three.
Yeah, I agree. On one of your LinkedIn posts, I was looking for it earlier because it just, you know how you read something and then you go back and you think, that just rang out at me. On one of your posts, it's got, this is a break glass emergency. I forget who said that, but it was just perfect for me.
It was Senior Deputy Governor Carolyn Rogers last April, the Senior Deputy Governor of the Bank of Canada. And I thought, I valued that from the Bank of Canada because I've felt that for the time I've been in Ottawa, that there just hasn't been an appreciation of how productivity occurs. It actually was in the letter. When you apply to the Senate, you write a letter. So when I applied, I think it was probably more than 7 years ago, the basis of my letter was Canada's lagging productivity and our lack of embracing innovation. And the fact that we are a monopolistic economy and that we encourage monopolies and we discourage innovators. And we think that if you invest in research, you're investing in innovation. But those are two very different things. An idea needs to be turned into opportunity, jobs, and prosperity. And I've tried to do that a few times as an entrepreneur. It's a pretty tough process. And we don't do that process well in this country. We invent, we discover, we're great with our research, but we don't turn it into opportunities, jobs, and prosperity.
And even when we do, we export those. This is the thing what's killing me right now is I don't think that even the people who get it, I'm a little afraid of, because they might be trying to solve the 1970s problem again. We're not a manufacturing economy. We're barely a natural resources economy. We're in a digital world, and the world becomes digital very quickly. There's an old saying, how do you go bankrupt? Slowly at first and then quickly. And I think we've been coasting through that slowly at first and don't realize how fast things are going to start happening. We largely failed at digital transformation. I've said this before. In the early 2000s, I used to be out talking to people around the world about Canada's digital government. We had a lot of promise.
And it's been ignored. There has been some small success achieved by Terry Beach, but the reality is it's little demonstration projects. We have no digital government strategy at all. And if we did, you couldn't get appointed to the position of deputy minister unless you had digital demonstrated digital implementation experience. You couldn't get appointed through the federal government unless you'd taken courses and proven that you can contribute. None of that. Ask the Canada School about the programs they have available, and there's not one deputy minister that requires their team to take those digital courses.
Yep.
The demonstration of the fact that we are not taking this issue of digital government seriously is the fact that there is no deputy minister that is requiring their department and senior executives in their department to take courses from the Canada School to learn the requirements related to developing digital government programs. There is no deputy minister seeing their key criteria in their promotion being that they have experience and success in implementing digital government programs. We have no plan around digital government at a time when every Canadian does everything in their lives virtually on their phones.
Yeah, I was in a meeting the other day and people were talking about the reasons why we don't have digital government. Canadians don't trust it. And then you saw my interview with Estonia came out of Russia. They're talking about their people didn't trust them. They still managed to get a digital government. It's not just a strategy. I'm tired of the word strategy. I don't want to tell my kids in 10 years that what you do about this, Dad. I helped develop a strategy. But they not only have a strategy, they have action. And we're still making excuses about Canadians won't trust us. No wonder they won't trust us. We're not getting results.
But the data actually are that 8 out of 10 Canadians, when it's available, prefer digital government services. So when it's available, but as well, we're not doing anything to give Canadians more confidence. We're allowing the disinformation to erode Canadians' confidence. So I'll take digital identity as an example. Tens of thousands of emails into our office. Certainly, I'll say well over 10,000 the last time we looked. Emails into our office saying people do not implement this Chinese control system about my identity and what I do on the internet. And I did actually reach out to one person who I found was a real person and was able to contact them. I said, what is your objective here? What do you want? And they want security, privacy, and control. That's what digital identity provides. And the disinformation has convinced them otherwise. So as a result, I am not being provided the right to have a digital identity interface, banking, anything I do online in Canada because of the fact that there's a disinformation campaign that has been undermining my ability to implement a more secure system for myself.
Yeah, and in the absence of that, the fraudsters are having a field day.
They're having a field day.
Because the disinformation is just let run wild. I don't understand it. I don't know why.
The bank fraud situation in Canada is terrifying. I was honored to be invited as a unilingual Anglophone to be on a Quebec program that is their marketplace called La Facture. I was the only parliamentarian asked to be on it because I'm the only parliamentarian that's been speaking loudly about the growing problem of bank fraud where Canadians are having money stolen. And it all is preventable by technologies that are available today that our banks are not implementing. And there's no recourse for them. I've come across situations where banks aren't even reporting to their own fraud department, fraudulent events that have occurred, where false ID was presented at a branch, accepted, access to accounts was granted, shut down because of suspicious activity, and it still wasn't reported to their fraud department or to their customer from whom the money was stolen.
So our failure to become a digital economy I think that's a fair assessment that we failed to become a digital economy. We're now going to move into an AI economy. And I was telling your assistant before this started, we think that our failure to act has no victims. And we just talked about one, older people who are taken advantage of, who lose everything they have in fraud. And we can't pass Bill C-26. We have a whole issue of the next generation and where they're going to work. And the example I gave is my son is a video editor. He came out of school, very talented, great YouTube video editor. Guess what? Those jobs are gone. And they went in about 12 months. Why? Because the company he worked for discovered they could edit with AI faster than they could and cheaper. And that was it. And now he's looking for a new career. I don't know where he's going to find it. And that stuff disturbed me. So the question is, what should we be doing? You're an entrepreneur. You've helped build wealth and worth. What should we be doing?
the biggest single highly strategic change that we have to make in this country is that government has to orient itself around innovators and entrepreneurs. Innovators are the source of prosperity and opportunity and jobs in our future. They are constantly looking at problems as opportunities. And the trouble we have right now is too many of our public policies come out of Ottawa from people who are not entrepreneurial, whose job is to avoid risk, not embrace it. Entrepreneurs embrace risk. They look at ways of doing what everybody says isn't possible to be done. And my view is the toughest thing we have in Canada right now is to get those out of the way that are saying it can't be done, and let those who are doing it accelerate their efforts. So to me, regulatory reform is really important to make sure that our regulations are pro-competitive, really support new entrants into markets who are bringing disruptive alternatives, because we can have disruption from within or disruption from outside of the country. And right now, it's all coming from outside of Canada. So that means all the wealth is leaving the country that disruption is causing. Let's become entrepreneur and innovator-centric. Let's use that in procurement. Let's look at our regulations. Let's look at our programs across government and start to use our entrepreneurs as our competitive advantage globally. And if we did that, we would become the disruptors, not be the disrupted. And right now, we are very clearly the disrupted.
Because I'd like your opinion on it. Because yes, we need to get more engaged with entrepreneurs. We don't like to take risk. It bothers the heck out of me that we won't risk $10 million or $20 million, but we'll give away a pile of money on an HST rebate that does nothing. So we have no equivalent.
Or battery plants from foreign.
Or battery plants that
foreign IP.
And we're about to give away $2 billion on AI that will yield, I say this clearly, will yield us nothing. And so we won't take those risks. But structurally in the government, I was watching this when I was at a meeting, or watching different people, and they all know they're siloed. They all know that they're risk averse. The employees know this. The people who are leading these departments know what the problem is. You can't cross lines in Ottawa. You can't cross departments, and you are there to avoid risk at all costs. How do we get past that? And it's not, by the way, it's not political. We've had party after party in power. This is not new, but somehow we've got to break
culture in Ottawa.
Yeah.
It's a culture, right? And so I don't blame the public servants for being anti-risk. I don't blame them for being siloed. That's the culture. That's the structure. So we've got to find ways to break through the structure. And I think the supercluster idea was kind of one of those concepts. The trouble with the supercluster idea was it was all about funding, with Ottawa still in control of where every dollar went and how it was spent, versus the key issue, which is really regulatory and procurement, as far as I'm concerned. Our regulations have stagnated. Our regulatory process has completely stagnated in this country. We regulate in decades and technology is moving in months. So business models are changing in months. We have got to find a way to sectorally almost create sandboxes that bring those who are at the cutting edge of innovation together in key areas where we see our future, and build procurement and regulation and programs around the needs of those curated innovators. And they should be curated by the subject matter experts and by private investors. Because what you want to make sure is that technology and what they're doing is safe and real and competitive. And number two, you want to make sure that there's an opportunity for growth that the private sector is willing to invest in, because we will not have the government resources necessary. And you may recall that a year and a half ago, we published a report in the Senate talking about needed an innovation strategy for the data-driven economy. And that was our banking committee report. The biggest issue wasn't money. It was the IP protection. It was data rights. It was all the stuff around the investment structure so that we didn't have a leaky bucket. If you can give certainty around regulatory reform and procurement and a few other elements to investors, they'll come in. If you've got a quality technology and an opportunity that has that certainty around it. But right now there's so much uncertainty. There's no business investment in Canada, relatively speaking. And with the current threat that we're facing, there's going to be even less, or there is even less.
Yeah.
So for me, it's becoming very specific in how we run our government services and start pushing the departments to the periphery.
The crazy thing is that in that same report was that it leads out by saying those industries and those places where we have done digitalization, where we have gotten it, we actually survived COVID better. We know that this yields results.
20 years of data from Stats Canada showing that digitally intensive industries grow 4 times faster than the GDP of the country.
Yep.
But we still ignore the public policy changes to accelerate that across the economy.
Yeah. But let's say we could straighten this out. We could actually make a change in government processes and we invest the money. How do we keep it in Canada? That's the thing that just drives me crazy because we keep investing. There's lots of IP that gets developed in Canada. Most of it goes out and gets exploited by people outside the country.
58% is gone within 2 years, funded by Canadians, publicly or privately. No, it's absolutely ridiculous. But you had Jim Balsley on a couple weeks ago, and certainly he spoke to our committee very passionately, was incredibly well received by the Banking Committee in the Senate for the strength and clarity of the points he was making. But the biggest issue is that we've had a leaky bucket as it comes to commercializing those ideas, the process of taking an idea and turning it into opportunities, jobs, and wealth is very different than the process of getting to that idea. So we've got a great research engine in this country, but we've got absolutely no transmission that links it into the economy. And as a result, it's by chance that one starts to get commercialized in Canada, and the system isn't working for entrepreneurs for the most part. Sometimes they're fortunate enough to be in a really good incubator that's changing that, like CDL or another number like that. But the chances of that, the system isn't designed to do that at this point in time. If that were to change, we wouldn't have the leaky bucket that we have right now, where most of the money that is invested has to come from outside of the country. We've got to find a way to have the certainty that we get investment from Canada and it's incentivized from Canada, be it, there's certainly a lot of debate about what the role should be of the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board or other of the the biggest pension funds in the country. But the reality is we don't have incentives for people to invest in business. It's seen as enriching the rich. This is about taking money from within a community and having it invested in that community. We've got to find a way to unlock the pools of capital that are right across our country in every community. There are people capable of investing in their community, but they need help to do that in a way that they have some certainty and comfort. And so we may want to look at equity tax credits. We may want to look at flow-through shares for IP. There's so many different tools that we can have if the priority becomes using our entrepreneurs to rebuild our competitiveness and sovereignty. I believe that our entrepreneurs are the ones who can help us solve our biggest, hairiest problems in healthcare, you name it. And we should be not buying solutions and have our public service decision makers are avoiding risk so heavily that they just go to the biggest supplier in the world. They always default to that. The whole system for procurement is designed around that, where that may be actually quite often the biggest risk to go down.
I don't know if Canadians realize, I was a strategic consultant for about 20 years. I ran an international consulting practice. Yep. The only place I ever walked away and said I would never work there again was procurement in the Canadian federal government.
Yep.
And the reason is, no matter what you put together, somebody was coming out with a rule that says that some 3-letter company, some big American company was going to get this, and that's all there was going to be to it. Why? It's the least risk. We can't offend the free trade agreement, blah, 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 blah. And it was a setup from the word go.
Jim, it's just so upsetting. I say it often, and I believe it to be true. The way that Ottawa manages risks in the whole process for managing risks actually creates them.
Yep.
In the long
run. Actually. Yeah.
And that's why we find ourselves where we are today.
Yeah. Another place that's got to change. One question, and this drives me nuts, and maybe you thought it through, is Silicon Valley when I was down working for Cisco in early 2000s or around there, Silicon Valley was a different place. people were taking risks. They were trying to drive new businesses. Some of it were silly risks. It got crazy. We had the bubble burst and all that stuff. But it was a competitive economy. My sense now is that the Peter Thiel sort of philosophy is that you drive a monopoly and you drive it hard and you drive it through North America. How do we survive that? Because we're just de-risking ideas as we did with AI. We just de-risk this stuff, do all the development, and Google buys it and says, thank you. If they can't buy the company, they'll buy the person, doesn't matter. We could never stand up to that degree of free cash that's floating around. Is there a way for us to get through that?
Incentives. When you don't have a clear path forward, you have to create something that's dramatically different. I looked at Ukraine as a great example. Ukraine, it was an analog government based in the Soviet era.
Yeah.
And Zelensky was elected. I was honored to actually be in Kyiv for that election in 2019. The world was laughing about him. He was a comedian. It was just outrageous that this man was being elected president. But he came in with one huge priority, and we've spoken about it before, and that's to digitize government.
Yeah.
And they went in 3 years from zero to being the world leader. Canada has been stagnating for a generation, and we just keep plummeting down the list because everybody else keeps moving ahead. But literally for a generation, we've stagnated on this issue. Back to the early 2000s when you thought it was possible. It was possible, but it was never a priority. So he created DIA. He created a world-leading system that is being attacked by the Russians from day one vigorously. You could be sure that the one thing that the Russians want to break into is DIA and all the data. So he succeeded. Look at that army, how they succeeded from the get-go. Biden was going to fly him out. He said, do you want a flight? He said, I don't want a flight, I want ammo. So the reality is when you've got a strong will and when you have that strong political leadership, you can accomplish a lot. I believe in Canadians. I believe in the country the spirit of our country in 1939. And in 1940, Churchill, that 5 days in May 1940, when Churchill became prime minister, and the battle really began to protect Great Britain and democracy, Canada came to life and was very quickly a country that was recognized and respected. And we went from being nothing to being the fourth largest military in the world. It's remarkable what we accomplished. We can do it economically and militarily, but it requires political leadership to unite the country around it. I think President Trump has achieved the uniting part. If we don't act politically with political leadership, it'll be, unfortunately, a dividing activity in the end, and Trump will win. I think Canadians are ready to be united around this issue.
I hope you're right, because I believe that there is something percolating there. And I think the 1939 example is great. We got into this ahead of the United States, a much bigger economy. And we led at those times. And I think we've lost our sense of the fact that we could lead. And that troubles me and probably all of us. It should trouble what we're going to leave our children and the legacy.
Well, and the leading doesn't actually sometimes cost money. We created forward observation officers. My dad was one in the artillery. We devolved authority from generals down to lieutenants, captains on the front line with the troops on the front lines, directing up to 150 guns from the front lines. The Germans thought we had an automatic artillery weapon because it was the only way you could have that much firepower that quickly.
Yeah.
In their minds. It was a devolution of authority. The other one we did is we had tanks that were not able to keep up. They took the turrets off of them, put machine guns on them, called them kangaroos, and used them to blast through German lines and fight from the rear flank. There's so many different ways that we innovated. And to me, we have got a government that can't innovate because it's seen as risk.
And to some extent, a lot of people who feel that if we stand up to the U.S., that means we have to be enemies of it. We don't have to be enemies of anybody. We can stand up and find our own strategy and our own way through.
Absolutely. And I think we should be spending federally a whole lot of money advertising on U.S. television social channels about how this is when we put in countermeasures, if we do, this is the last thing we want to do. But we have no choice.
Yeah.
And we're sorry for the pain that it might cause, and we will release these as quickly as possible. But the threat has to be taken away as well.
We could take that $2 billion and that we're going to spend on AI and do that. And I laugh about this, but the Chinese, you have to respect them. They didn't adopt the same strategy as Silicon Valley. They have come out now with an AI product, open source, as good as anything. I've been working on it and inspecting it. It's as good as anything out there. And they just changed the rules of the game. And we need that sort of piece to change the
Absolutely.
rules of the game.
Well, that's what President Trump is doing constantly.
Yeah.
He has totally changed the rules of democracy and politics.
Yep. And we need our own alternative to that. If we take a look forward, we reserve our optimism. Tell me about the future that you see, that if we got it together.
I'm really optimistic about our country. I believe that globally, people are going to be looking for a safe place to host their data. Right now, we remain at the wrong end of a data vacuum. We remain at the mercy of the most ugly cyber terrorists out there. Bill C-26 would have made it through the Senate had a very big flaw identified by the sponsor, Senator John McNair, which I'm really glad he identified it. Unfortunately, by proroguing Parliament when he did, the Prime Minister ended up with that bill dropped. All that has to happen is the House has to accept the amendment from the Senate. That means the bill just needs to be reintroduced as amended, get approval in the House of Commons instead of get approval in the Senate. It could move through very rapidly with the approval of the House and the Senate. There's no debate from anybody on where the bill stands as amended.
We know how to move a bill through the Parliament in 2 days if we need to.
We did that with the largest trade agreement the world's ever seen when COVID hit.
So there's no excuse for it, and not to criticize any politician. That's not our job. This could have been done. Yeah. And that's sad because it wasn't a priority.
An amended Bill C-27 could be brought through very rapidly. Unfortunately, the stalemate in the House of Commons all fall meant that bill just died, where it was 96% of witnesses to the Indo Committee in the House agreed that the bill should be passed, that there were amendments that were very reasonable to bring some certainty to that bill. So the reality is we don't have updated data rights. But if we did, if we had a cyber secure citizen right or individual data rights in a situation, imagine Canada becoming a destination for being the safe home for your data. As Switzerland became one of the safest banking systems for a period of time in the world and most trusted. There's a way for us to lead in an era where people are uncertain about who they're dealing with. If we had a regulatory environment that kept up with technological changes through using industry standards more than regulations, but that were seen as being equivalent to the regulations, we could have an environment where if you operated from Canada, you were automatically globally a trusted brand around the world. That this is one that is not going to be using your data against you, as most of the big tech companies do. It is going to be using your data for your benefit clearly and with your authority clearly. There's a huge opportunity for Canada to be a trusted leader globally.
I don't know if people know how much work Jim Balsillie and his group have done to build a standards organization that is respected around the world.
Thank you for saying that. There's the work of the Digital Governance Council created by Jim Balsillie, the vision of that. Council for Canadian Innovators. So there's a voice of innovators in Ottawa. There never was. There was big business, there was small business, but there was business generally. But for innovators and the challenges they're facing distinctly, nothing. So there's a huge debt of gratitude in my mind for the work he's done and the voice he's given to these issues, not just his own, but that so many others are empowered by the evidence that he's helped to create through CG, any number of these other organizations that he's helped to create, not just helped to create, led the creation of. Yeah, I thank you for saying that.
And so what other things could we be doing to move forward?
We just have to start viewing our problems as opportunities. In sales, use your strength your weakness as a strength. The way to succeed It's you don't let your weakness used against you. Find a way to use it as a strength. And we have that ability. We've done it before at an existential crisis. It was a military crisis. And I don't believe Americans are going to be invading Canada. But there's an economic strength being applied that is almost equivalent as far as I'm concerned. And it's in the risk that's being spoken about. How it will unfold, we don't know. We'll know as of Saturday.
And my hope is, and I'm just afraid of all the elections and everything's happened. My hope is that we got through in 1939 because our government came together.
Yes.
And they realized it was more important to be Canadian than to be partisan. Yes, they didn't get along. Yes, they had different opinions, but everybody put the country first. And I don't know how we get to that again, because we can't have a stalemated parliament. I don't care what the excuse is. We've
got to get to an election sooner than later, for sure. And Canadians have to be given a chance to decide how they want to go forward based on that election. And then we've got to start, as you say, working as Canadians. I have the luxury of being an independent senator. I'm not whipped. I'm not told what to say. That's a luxury in Ottawa, to be independent, nonpartisan. I get to focus just on policy. I don't have a whip looking over my shoulder saying, who are you talking to, or why are you speaking against this bill, whatever. I don't have any of that. I'm just hoping that more of us might be able to act just for Canada.
Yeah. Which is, and in fairness, you can criticize the Prime Minister, but one of the great things I think that we did was to try to depoliticize the Senate. We knew people can work together. We don't have to sacrifice the country for our team,
I would offer that I think it's unfortunate the Prime Minister chose to hang on as long as he did, because he had some legacy items.
Yep.
But they've been lost in the division that has emerged, that I think the division is not going to help Canada right now.
Yeah.
So at least he's resigned. I think the sooner he moves to the back, the better, because I don't think his voice has been heard clearly for quite a while. I think it's been tuned out. And right now we need voices that are really trusted. I think that Minister LeBlanc having the lead on this file is a good thing. I think his voice is trusted. But it's a really tough time in this country at this moment, because the frustration of those who are not confident in the Prime Minister anymore comes through as being anti-Canadian sometimes, and I don't think it is. It's a really tough time in this country, but there will be an election. I'm hoping it's sooner than later, and what we have to do is decide that after that election, we are going to work just as Canadians.
And what can we do as business people and as citizens? And this is not Senator, this is you as a Canadian. What should we be doing? What could we as Canadians be doing to help us through this?
I'm just a real believer that people have to focus not on problems, but on how they're going to make things better. What can we each do to improve our lot in our community, improve our lot in our province, nationally? The reason I could never be in opposition is I can't just criticize. My mother and my father sit on my shoulders, late mother and father sit on my shoulders. And if you don't have something constructive to say, then don't say anything at all. And so I couldn't possibly be in opposition. But I'm really hoping that all of us, as we start to move forward, focus on not just the simplistic responses, but how do we find a way to be more competitive? And it's going to take some tough medicine for all of us. I'm genuinely worried about the hardship that's going to come over at least the next 2 years, but maybe for 4 years and maybe beyond that. We don't know. I'm worried about the hardship that's going to come. We are in a very precarious position today. People being angry about that, I respect. But the fact of the matter is, we've got to stop being angry, and we got to start focusing on what we need to do differently. That's the hard part. It's easy to be angry. It's easy to incite people to be angry about the circumstances they find themselves in and to blame others. We got to stop that and start moving towards what do we do differently that will start to unite us And let's focus on the things that unite us. And if they're really challenging issues that people are not agreeing on, from my standpoint, let's put those off to the back burner for a little bit and focus on the ones that we can all agree on. Let's start to build some momentum of being Canadian first, and then start to deal with some of the tough issues we're going to have to take on right up front, for sure. But let's be very strategic about which ones.
Yeah. I think it's a question of keeping focus. You did a marvelous thing on your LinkedIn piece where you were talking about pages for the Senate, taking bright people from university and giving them an exposure to government. I'm hoping that we can tell those young people in 10 years that we helped create a future for them.
They inspire us in the Senate every day. We've got to, I know of schools that I'm aware of that came to Ottawa at grade 7, grade 8 kids coming to Ottawa, did not visit Parliament.
No way.
Did not visit Parliament. Took a ghost walk, went to the Museum of Civilization, went to the Museum of Nature, you name it, did not visit Parliament. It terrified me. It scared the bejesus out of me.
Hey, I don't know what to say. When I went to visit Parliament, we were singing Canada. So it's been a while, but it was one of the great honors of my life walking.
Bobby Jimmy, wasn't it?
Yeah, we can do it again.
Yeah. This is a challenging time for our country, but I believe in Canada. I believe in what we've accomplished in the past. I believe what we can accomplish in the future. From grain farmers on the prairies to Indigenous communities across the country to the Atlantic Canada and the West Coast, I'm identifying huge opportunities in carbon removal technologies that are great new business industries. We have to fight climate change. It's real. We got to fight it. Canada's got a huge industrial opportunity in removing carbon from the atmosphere and leading in that globally. It's not saying you don't reduce your carbon emissions. Of course, we have to reduce our carbon emissions, but we also need to remove past emissions. There's huge new industries there for us to take global leadership in. We just have to, as a country, decide that's important. Rather than taking prosperity for granted, the moment we stop taking prosperity for granted in Canada, we've got a lot of opportunity in our future.
I'm going to leave us there. Colin, thank you so much for joining me on the program. As always, you're an inspiration, and I thank you for helping. These aren't easy answers, and they're not easy questions, and I thank you for helping our audience and me through those.
Jim, I appreciate you taking the time to do what you do.
My guest has been Senator Colin Deacon, entrepreneur, proud Canadian, and a member of our upper chamber. Thank you so much, sir.
Thanks, Jim. Really nice to see you.
And that's the second episode of our show, Can Canada Get Its Mojo Back? I hope you're enjoying this series. I'd love to hear your comments, questions, and even guest suggestions. You could reach me at editorial@technewsday.ca or find me on LinkedIn, or if you're watching this on YouTube, leave us a comment and maybe a like and subscribe if you're so inclined. I'm your host, Jim Love. Thanks for spending time with us.